Hi all, this is Allmighty and welcome to this video. So today I actually prepared the top blunders of the Women's World Chess Championship match. The match which was played actually in May, so this month, a couple of weeks ago. It finished last week and we have a new Women's World Champion, and that is Ju Wenjun. She played against Tan Zhongyi, then now a former world champion. So it is quite interesting to see what type of blunders do actually people make at such a high stake match. And so without further ado, let's just jump in right into the video. So in fifth place, we have a situation from round 5. Here let's just first examine the position. As we can see, white has the bishop pair, but he is a pawn down. Also, when we are looking at the position more generally, we see that black has this knight on e4, and essentially that he has much more attacking chances, because white's king is in much greater danger than black's king, because the queen can come very soon to g4, for example, play knight to h4 or knight to e5 and pose some threats. When the knight moves, the rook can come on the g file. It is a very dangerous situation here for white. So what she needs to do, she needs to find the best moves to provide the best defense. And the move that would help her here is definitely bishop to d1. It doesn't seem like a move that you would find right away. You would definitely need to study position some more. And the main reason is that at any point you would like to move this rook and transfer the bishop to f3. If of course black gives you a chance to do that. What black would definitely like to do is play knight to d4, knight to e5, sorry, which forces the queen to move. For example, queen to d4, and now something like rook to g6 is met with rook to c2. So moving the rook out of the way, attacking the queen. Queen comes on h3, and now bishop to f4. So this pawn is defended by the rook, and okay, black is not allowing queen to f3. Black is not allowing bishop to f3 because of queen to f3, and now the battle is still holding on. You can play, for example, knight to f3, bishop f3, and queen to f3, but after something like rook to f2, everything is defended, so knight cannot capture because rook on e8 is devastating. After a couple of moves, we would see that black is still in a better position, but the battle is going on, and it's really difficult to calculate, definitely in the situation they were with low times on the clock and everything. So I would still consider this a blunder, not playing bishop to d1. Instead of that, what happened is that instead of bishop to d1, here white played c4. And unfortunately, in this position, this move is quite slow, because essentially a knight to e5 resolves the situation for black immediately. Queen is attacked once again, queen to d4, and now rook to g6. Now you cannot, for example, play rook to f1 or move this rook because the bishop isn't on d1. So immediate stopping of the knight to f3 isn't there. So here white plays bishop to e4, pawn captures on e4, and now you cannot capture because knight to f3 comes with check, everything is defended, and rook will pick up the queen. So you need to move out of the way because knight to f3 is a very big threat, forking the king, the rook, and the queen. Here Tan Zhongyi played king to f1 and knight to f3 nevertheless, because pawn captures and there is a checkmate in 2. First queen to h3, king to f2, and queen to g2 is checkmate. If you don't do that, if you for example block with the rook, still queen to g2 is checkmate. So you cannot capture, and here white tried queen to d7, but after knight to h2 she resigned the game. And essentially there is no better defense against this move. Essentially the checkmate will follow soon. This is essentially the first blunder. And in fourth place, we have a situation from round 3, and as you can see, it happened quite early in the game. Already on the 14th move, Ju Wenjun this time makes a blunder. And essentially, as we look at the position, it is the opening or some kind of a Catalan, where black is holding on the c4 pawn. So black is a pawn up, and this is essentially what it means in this variation, that it gives white much activity. And at the moment, the main problem for black is this g7 pawn, how to defend it. So there are a couple of ways. Of course, you can play bishop to f8, defend it. You can play g6. If you go castle or play rook to g8, then the bishop to h6 seems like an idea. So here g6 would be the best move, and yeah, now bishop to h6 kind of stops castling, and if you go knight to e5, you give up another pawn. Queen to h3 is an idea. With bishop to g7 attacking the rook and the knight, so rook to g8, knight to e4, and as you can see, white is much more active, and he is going for this h7 pawn, and he is going for the king, because king cannot castle now, and is a very good compensation in this variation for the two pawns. But okay, this didn't happen in the game. Ju Wenjun blundered, and the blunder was g5. So she didn't play g6. She thought that she can play g5 because, okay, the bishop is defending. There are two attackers, but you cannot capture immediately on g5 because of rook to g8. And of course, Tan Zhongyi notices that, but I guess when she played this variation, she was definitely prepared for it, and she played queen to h5, which is the best move. So you don't want to capture the pawn immediately. You move the queen from the g file, and then you will capture on g5. And what happened in the next couple of moves? Essentially, black's position kind of just fell apart, because as you can see, black cannot castle queenside, nor she can castle kingside, because the position is wide open. And on this level, this essentially means a lost game. Knight c5 followed, we saw bishop to g5, and now c6 defending this pawn. Rook to d4 and rook to d7, bishop captures on e7, king captures on e7, and after queen to h4 and king to e8, doubling of the rooks, this position is quite simply lost, because the powerful move that will happen is knight to e4. And what this does is essentially remove this knight from the defense of the d7 rook, and yeah, if black doesn't capture, then these two squares for the knight will be deadly. So yeah, this is essentially the second blunder that I wanted to show you. So in third place, we have a situation from round 2, and it is a rook's endgame. So usually, as we all know, rook's endgames are kind of drawish, but it isn't that case essentially when you have two rooks on the board. Then a lot of threats are there, and a lot of threats can occur, so you definitely have to be very careful. Judging by the general position here, it should be a draw, but black at least has some kind of a psychological advantage because he has these two connected central pawns, and of course there is a rook behind him, so pushing of the pawn of the d pawn comes naturally, and the c pawn can come behind it to support it. So what needs to happen here? White is on the move, and he needs to make a correct decision. And sometimes in rook's endgames, in order to gain advantage or even go to a drawish position, you would have to occupy your opponent's rooks to do something that you want them to do. So give them some responsibility. It's not just enough to give checks and then push your pawns. Sometimes it's also good to occupy your opponent's rooks. And the move that does something like that is rook to c6. So go behind this pawn, the pawn which is essentially the supporter pawn, and when you get rid of him, it wouldn't be too hard to actually stop this other pawn with the two rooks to go about preventing this pawn from queening. If the pawn is pushed, you capture on c5, and already here on d2 you also have this rook to d5 move. So just in a couple of moves you essentially stopped everything. But of course, black doesn't have to push the pawn. He can go about, I don't know, either defending it. So you have given the other black rook the responsibility of keeping an eye on this pawn. And now after something like rook to c1, and again pushing of the pawn, you can just move the king on f3, on e3. Black's king cannot come closer, and essentially if d2 is pushed, you put the rook on d1, and after, if you give some checks, get some checks, king can come on e2, and black cannot hope that he can push you out of this position and promote. He always has to take care of this pawn, and that is the main problem for him. So this is something that could happen. Okay, there is also a possibility that instead of rook to e5 there is this check, but king to f3, and if black captures a pawn, you capture a pawn. And now the position is simpler. There is this pawn which is unsupported, rook to d5 is a move, rook to d1 is a move, and essentially it is a drawn position. But what happened in the game? Why is this a blunder? Because white played f5. So here Ju Wenjun had an idea that probably she wanted to make an active move, and I can only imagine that this move was made quite quickly, because this is the move 39, and yeah, in move 40 you reach time control. So she wanted to make some threats to capture on g6, but Tan Zhongyi simply captured. We have pawn captures, and now the pawn moves to d3. And the main difference between this position and the previous position with the rook on c6 is now that the king can easily come and support the pawns as well. Now rook to c6 is too slow, because essentially rook to d5 can defend everything. So rook to d5 is a move, d2 immediately is a move, and also rook to a2 is a move. Playing king to e3 is met with rook to e2 check, and playing king to f3, which was played in the game, is met by d2. And now rook to d1 and essentially rook to c2 once again defends this pawn, which will come to c3, and then rook to c1 is a very simple move to make. Also, this king will come at some point to support them, and essentially it is a lost game, and Tan Zhongyi did win the game in the end. And in second place we have a situation from round 4, and as we can see, there is an attack going on the king's side. All of white's pieces is essentially attacking the queen, both of the rooks, the bishop on this diagonal, and also the pawn on g4. There is a lot of pressure on black side. We would argue that white is definitely just a little bit better, but she doesn't have anything decisive. The main reason is even if you capture, the pawn can simply capture, and you don't have enough pieces attacking on the g file in order to provide a very strong attack. Here black, after this move rook to g2, can just play the rooks on the g file and everything is safe, because essentially even if white does capture on f5, yeah, a lot of pawns are actually supporting it. Also the bishop on c8, this is deadlocked in. And why am I showing you this position? Because obviously Tan Zhongyi in this position decided to help Ju Wenjun in order to just go and win the game. Here she played g5, and it is quite difficult to understand why would someone make such a move. Okay, maybe she felt frustrated because it's black. Now she cannot do anything, essentially she cannot go for win. She just has to wait and see, will white make some move in order to advance or something, but essentially she had to know that that white cannot win in this position. But okay, she played g5, and now simply rook to f3, moving out of the way. The pawn cannot capture because the king is here and the pawn is pinned, so king to g7, and after this queen to h5. And the main reason behind this move and why is white winning the game is that this pawn cannot capture on g4. So if pawn captures, there is queen to g6, king to h8 is the only move, and queen to h6. Now you cannot block with the rook because you will get checkmated on f8. You go to g8, and now rook to g4 even. Rook captures on f3, rook captures on g5, you have to give up the queen. Queen captures on g5, and now, okay, if you go on the h file, then you get checkmated in 2 moves on h7, so you have to run to f7. But this is met with bishop to g6 check. You cannot go on this side, you have to go back, and after this the same idea, bishop to e4. You cannot go here because you will get checkmated, so you go here, and now you have lost the rook and essentially the game. So this, okay, didn't happen immediately in the game. First, after queen to h5, bishop to d7 was played, but now h4 as well. So definitely white is pushing through with the pawns. So here black captured, and the same idea followed, and white won the game quite easily. And in first place we have a situation from round 8, and it's quite an interesting situation because from all the blunders from the list, this is essentially the only one from the game which ended in a draw. So previously all the blunders from the list would actually mean that the person which made the blunder lost the game, but here this blunder went unpunished. So let's just see what happened here in this situation. And of course it is quite difficult to go on first place because on second place you had such a positional blow with that g5, essentially breaking your whole defense. But why I put this in the first place is just the reason is quite simple. It's a simple calculation error. So here white captured on e5, and here instead of taking with the knight, simplifying the position, here black captured with the rook, which essentially forces the endgame, which is I would say very bad for black, and it is quite simple. Okay, I will show you also what white played in the game and why this blunder went unpunished. But here rook to e5 should have been played, and after knight to e5, so it is pretty much the same. So after if you capture with the queen as well, also the queen will capture on e5, but let's go through the variation when knight captures on e5. f4 is pushed, and now you have to move the knight on on g4 or d7. Queen will capture on f6, knight captures on f6, and now bishop to c4. This comes with a check. You cannot capture the bishop because rook to d8 is coming, and this is also with a check, and you have time to actually move your knight, and you are winning because you have won just the exchange. The move that you need to make is knight to d5. After this, bishop captures, and if you capture with the rook, or if you capture with the pawn, knight will come to d4. Okay, if you capture with the rook, of course, rook to d5. But here, knight to d4 comes, and why is this essentially a lost game? So the material is equal, but for all of you who are very well versed in endgame plays, you will see that all of the black pawns are on light squares, and also this pawn is attacked. You would have to play something like a6, and this is a position which is lost for black because rook to e1, c6 will be played, and then what you need to do with white, you just need to bring your king closer, some little king walk, and essentially support your pawn and go and queen. And that is the main reason. Not the main reason, the main idea. Something that black could play, so let me just quickly go over it, just that you can see that I'm not lying to you, that essentially this is lost for black. Here you play c6, and the main problem for black is that essentially you cannot move this knight from d4, and this knight from d4 can jump to all of these great squares. This bishop is kind of useless. It can only be used for defending pieces. All of white pawns are on dark squares. Okay, now this one is on c6, and if you play bishop to e8, rook to e6 can be played, and king to f7 doesn't do much because of course this rook is defended. If you play bishop to f7, rook to d6, and at any point when the pieces aren't attacked, king comes to c2, c3, b4, c5, b6, b7, and then c7, c8, and essentially black cannot do anything about it. So if he moves the rook from this file, then of course c7 and c8 come much sooner, but the bishop cannot help. This rook cannot be pushed away, so essentially it is lost for black. But in the game, what happened after this capture on e5, white played bishop to c2, and now f4 was played by black. So essentially the whole idea falls apart. You cannot, if you capture, knight captures, and there is no f4 move, which would essentially force everything. Also rook to d1 comes with the tempo now, since the bishop has moved away. And after all of these exchanges, the game ended up in a draw. But still, such a calculation error on such a high level, definitely a grandmaster should know that a position, and so an endgame position where all of the pawns are on the same square as the bishop and having the knight on d4 after all the exchanges should be a definitely easy win. But okay, it also happens in a World Championship match. I doubt that the same thing will occur, of course, in November, but of course you never know. I will definitely monitor that match as well and make a top blunder series as well. So yeah, this is pretty much it for this video. I hope you enjoyed. This time, usually from the tournaments where I have 50-60 games, it is much easier to find much clearer blunders, but now in a 10 game match, I hope that you weren't dissatisfied with the blunders which I chose for this video. But okay, yeah, this is pretty much it for this video. I would like to thank you for watching it, and I will see you next time.